We've got our new banners up. I don't know if you can see them at home, but we've got letters from Jesus. We'll be looking at the epistles for the next year, which is ambitious. I don't know if I've ever seen this done, but we're just going to call this Letters from Jesus because Jesus inspired the apostles to write the epistles, and that is what we are studying. I want to think about where we've been, first of all. In 2020, we looked at the life of Christ, a 2020 view, a 2020 vision of the life of Christ. And we spent an entire year looking at the life of Christ. Then in 2021, the next thing after the life of Christ would be the book of Acts. And we spent 9 months looking at the book of Acts and 3 months looking at Galatians, which may very well be the first epistle that was written by Paul to the churches in Galatia. So what's next? Well, the epistles. And as much as I would like to, we're not going to be able to do a detailed verse-by-verse study of all of the epistles. I might like that. Angie says, Ron, you're the only one that would like that, She tells me stuff like that. But I'd like to look at all of the epistles from a higher view. Excuse me. So we won't be able to get down into the verses that we might like, but we're going to take a general overview of all of the epistles. And we've got them listed here. And for each one, we'd like to have 3 sessions. And we'll be able to do the epistles that are remaining. Of course, Galatians already been done. But the epistles that are remaining, we'll be able to spend 3 weeks on. 1 week will be background and introduction. 1 week will be text and outline. 1 week will be topics and major lessons. And I've never seen this done before. So this is, I don't know if it's crazy or just different. I like the idea of it. We'll have 3 different ways of approaching, 3 instructors for each book. So that's kind of interesting. I need your cough button, Michael. All right, so I've never seen this done before, but I'm looking forward to it. So for the first quarter, we've got the book of Romans for 3 weeks, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Ephesians, and then we'll be able to start Philippians. So usually our quarters are 3 months long, and that allows the summer quarter to be the summer summer series. Forget what we call that. Anyway, that's why we do our quarters starting in December. And that's where we're going. We would like for you to read the book that we're looking at each week. Try and do this book in one sitting. So try and read the whole book of Romans at one time. This is doable. Part of the problem is, move this up. All right. Part of the problem is we just focus on one verse sometimes, or a section, and we don't get the big picture. And so when you read the whole book at a time, you're reading it as the apostle wrote it. You're reading it and you get a general sense of what's going on. And hopefully you get the idea of the big picture. I suspect you can read it, the book of Romans, in 16 chapters? maybe a half hour. Take some time. Try to do this each week. So for the next 3 weeks, read the book of Romans. Start after that, read the book of 1 Corinthians. Picture yourself as one of the first disciples. Here's the Apostle Paul. He sent us a letter. Let's sit down and read it. How are you going to feel about it? Read it like you've never read it before. And it's hard for us to do that. As we've said before, Galatians, already finished by Matt Wallen, and he did an excellent job with that. Those are available on Vimeo if you want to go back and look at that. Hebrews, we're going to skip. We're going to save that for later. In 2022, we're talking about taking a look back and a look forward. And we'll be looking at some history and then use Revelation to look forward, see where we've come from and where we're going. And so we've got a plan for this. This is something that's been in the works for a couple of years, and you're being very patient with us as we carry them out. So I want to look at, first of all, the epistles. The epistles, New Testament literature, are the 21 books from Romans through Jude, and we have those listed here. Now, an epistle, very common literary form at the time, was used for the purpose larger than just a private letter. These were to be read publicly. Imagine you're in that audience. You may not even be able to read. Many in the first century could not read, but many could. In fact, as Christianity spread, so did the idea of having schools, because, hey, we've got to be able to study this. We've got these letters from these apostles. We need to be able to read so we can know the Bible for ourselves. So Christianity is a taught religion. We have to study to show ourselves approved. We're not born into the covenant as the Jews were, and they had to go around to teach one another, saying, "Know the Lord," as Jeremiah says. But when the new covenant comes in, you won't have to teach every man his neighbor, saying, "Know the Lord," because all will know them. All will know the Lord. Well, you can't be part of this covenant if you don't know the Lord. So it's a different covenant. So Christianity, as it spread, so did the idea of having schools to teach people how to read. How do you make sense of this? They may have taught Latin and they may have taught Greek early on, as Latin was the common language. Greek had spread throughout the Mediterranean as a common language. So first of all, you divide up the epistles into Paul's epistles and general epistles. Paul's epistles can be divided up a number of ways. First of all, to the churches and to the brethren is one way to do it. I need to find that mute button. Just turn it off, I guess. So Paul's epistles goes from Romans to Philemon. And really, you can divide his epistles up a number of ways. There's the general epistles written by others. The style of these epistles you can see here. First of all, the writer to the addressee. And so very often Paul will start with himself Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, a servant of Jesus Christ, very common way for him to start. And that word servant, also slave, a bond servant, more than just what we might call a servant, not quite as much as what we might think of as a slave. So it's like one who volunteers for an indentured service. And that's kind of an interesting thing. So it's translated a couple of different ways. But Paul would describe himself first, and then to the churches in Galatia, to the brothers in Rome, to whoever he's writing to. Some general comments about the addressee. I long to see you. I long to come, speak to you, impart some spiritual gift. Different things he would say at that time. Then you'd have the body of the letter, and then a farewell. And all of the epistles generally fall in this format. Not always. Of course, there's always exceptions. Now, Paul's letters were meant to be read aloud. And we see this a couple of places. In 1 Thessalonians 5:27, I put you under oath before the Lord to have this letter read to all the brothers. Colossians 4:16, and when this letter has been read among you, have it also read in the churches of Laodiceans, and see also that you read the letter from Laodicea. So there is an epistle that we don't have. Laodicea. Paul had written to them. We don't have that letter. We say it is not extant. That's a good word for you. It doesn't exist anymore. We would love to see it, but God gave us what we need and not what we want. We have all things we need for life and for godliness, the Bible tells us. We don't have all the things we would like for curiosity's sake. And there's a lot that we would like to know. We know there's a couple of letters to Corinth that we do not have. One letter, he was angry and stern, and we don't have that one. He says in one of his, 2 Corinthians, I don't want to have to write you a letter like the last letter that was stern, he's getting on to them. Man, we'd love to see how did he handle that, Unfortunately, it's not available, all right? God saw fit in his providence to save the ones that we have. And more than that, we might like to see them, but they're just not available. So Paul's epistles, you can group them a number of ways, and every author does it a little bit different. General epistles, pastoral epistles, and prison epistles. The pastoral epistles were the ones where he's writing to Timothy and Titus, his student ministers that traveled with him, and he was training them as they traveled together. The prison epistles were written while he was in prison, and then the others would be just general epistles. That's one way to group them. You can group them by time. During the missionary tours, those epistles written during that time, written when he was a prisoner in Rome, and then following the first Roman imprisonment. Another way you can group Paul's epistles, the epistles to the churches, and then the epistles to the brethren. So whichever book you read, they'll do it a different way, no doubt, right? That's the nature of the beast. You think about our New Testament books. Unfortunately, the Bible did not fall down from heaven in a leather-bound cover and said, this is the book. Here, read this. It came one book at a time. Paul would write an epistle to the church in Ephesus, and he would write a letter to Philemon, and people would save that. And other congregations would say, we would like to copy that. And they would send a scribe over to copy that epistle from our beloved Apostle Paul. And after a while, churches started collecting these. And so when you think about what books belong in the Bible, that gets into a study of canon, which is a fascinating study. Pretty much the canon has been settled a long time ago. If you read Dan Brown, he would tell you that the Catholic Church decided these things. Well, that's not true. He writes fiction, all right? It's not fact. He takes the facts and kind of runs with them a little bit. The canon was pretty much settled by the time the Catholic Church got around to making it official. The brothers, the churches themselves are the ones that decided, and different men in different areas would be aware of what books were available, and they would know the difference between an inspired book and a non-inspired book. Sometimes you hear, the tabloid lost books of the Bible. Don't get real concerned about those. Those are the books that the early church fathers said, that might be a good history book or it might be a good devotional book, but it's not inspired. And they could tell. There are criteria that they used to decide what books were in the Bible and what books were not. And it's a fascinating study. I've got some books on it if you'd like to study it further. But that gets into a study of canon, which just means ruler. All right. Then, which documents that we have are closest to the original documents? We don't have any of the original documents that Paul wrote or that Peter wrote. And so we have copies of copies. Now, on one hand, you say, oh, well, that means none of them are reliable. And that's what the liberal scholars would want you to think. On the other hand, what we have is very close to the source, like within 100 years. We have copies that match each other almost identically. And anytime you do something by hand, you try copying a recipe or a long letter by letter, mistakes are going to work their way in. 99% of those mistakes that you may see, you can look at it and say, man, that's a problem. I misspelled this word, and it's easily correctable. All right? But we have enough documentary evidence that we can look at the original and we can be very trustworthy that what we have is what the apostles wrote. And that's the study of text. And that also is a fascinating study. And, so when you hear, we've got in Romans, almost all of the early documents we have has the title to the Romans. Well, remember, the title is also not inspired. Some guy started writing that at the top, and the other guy that was copying it thought it was a good idea. Well, when we get to Galatians, was it written to an individual church or a group of churches? Was it written to the churches in North Galatia or South Galatia? Well, we don't really know, and that's an interesting discussion. But it's moot, it really is neither here nor there. It was written to the church, and it's still things that would be beneficial for us today. So you think about the order of the New Testament. Why are our books written in the order that they're in? Or why are they placed in this order? You remember they started off as individual books. Why do we have Romans after Acts? Have you ever thought about that? The order is not inspired. Some guy just put them in an order, and it's probably not the order I would have done it. If I were the guy, I'd have probably done them chronologically. But how did he do it? Well, He put them in order, largest to the smallest. And I don't know if you've ever noticed that. Our epistles are in two groups, Paul's epistles first and General Epistles second. Largest epistle is Romans, so it goes first. 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians. Each one's getting progressively smaller. By the time you get down to Philemon, it's just probably half a page of handwritten material. Then we go to Hebrews. Hebrews is large again, so it's a general epistle. Whoever put these in this order, and we don't really know who did it, whoever did that obviously didn't think Paul was the author of Hebrews. And that's something you might want to think about. Alvis Miller and I had long discussions over, whether or not Paul, he was an advocate of Paul writing Hebrews. And of course, we really don't know. We'll have to wait till we get to heaven, and then we may not care. Get all choked up. So, anyway, that's that. So you got the epistles, and you can see how they are placed in order in our English Bible. All right. All that is introduction to where we can start the book of Romans. And, I won't get into all that during each time, but I thought during this first one, I wanted to set some groundwork and just introduce the epistles generally. I want to focus in now on Romans and several things here. Letters written to the church in Rome, Pros Romanius, to the Romans. So this is the title in the earliest manuscripts, and we can pretty much go with that. The writer identifies himself as Paul in chapter 1. In verse 1, he is the apostle to the Gentiles. In 11:3, thank you. He calls himself, he refers to himself in chapter 15, verses 15 through 20. Most scholars are going to agree, this is Paul, all right? Like everything else, there's always that one guy, right? There's always that one group that, the liberal scholars, they want to place the writer in the 2nd or 3rd century. They want to say it's not Paul, and, you just have to accept that they're there. But by and large, most scholars will say, it was Paul. You knew I'd get a map in there somewhere, didn't you? All right. I remember our teacher at school always talking about the Tübingen school, a school in Germany, and they were liberal scholars. They would always be the outlier. They would always be the one that was different. So let's talk about the city of Rome first of all. We are living in Rome, Georgia right now, of course, named after the city in Rome, Italy. We have 7 hills. Rome was founded in 753 BC. The myth says the city was started and named after Romulus, the son of Mars, who is a Roman god, the same as the Greek god Zeus. So they wanted this divine descendancy from the gods, and that's why, they've got this myth going. And so even here in Rome, Georgia, we have Romulus and Remus, who are the twins, and the myth is that they were saved and kept alive by a she-wolf, and one of those twins started the city of Rome. All right? Of course, we know that's a myth. Something to think about, those people in the 1st century, that was what they believed, and that was fact. And, it's hard for us to think those Greek myths, that was their religion. That was what they believed. And so, we just think it's a nice little story. That's what they believed. And it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around that. So the church in Rome had existed for a number of years. Romans 15:23. Since now I no longer have any room for work in these regions, I have longed for many years to come to you. So Rome, really in Rome, there were more slaves than there were free people. If all the slaves at once decided, hey, we've had enough of this system, we need to do something different, they could revolt, and they could have won easily. But this was the system, it was in place. And that's, kind of weird to think about how many slaves there were there in that time. Stark contrast between wealthy people and people in poverty there in Rome. Imagine the church in Rome. You might have had very rich people and very poor people going and attending worship together. And really, while we've got a variety of people here, very in large, I don't know anybody that's going hungry. We would want to take care of them. But it might be a very real possibility if you were in the Rome congregations. Also, the hedonistic lifestyle of Rome is very well known. You study history at all, these guys were awful. People that say, lifestyle is worse now than it's ever been, obviously have never studied history. These guys were awful, very depraved, and we're not going to get into it now, but you just study history, and it's just shameful the way these people acted, and they promoted it as being normal, being the way to go. And you read that in Romans. They not only do these things, they encourage others and support those that do them, in Romans chapter 1. So Paul, this is his second missionary journey, had pretty much covered Asia Minor, what we would call Turkey today, and he had gotten into Greece. Now, when he went to a city, he would go to the main cities, and he expected those people to talk to the outliers, the people in the suburbs, we might say, all right? Now, Paul says, I want to come to you guys in Rome, and eventually I want to get over to Spain. All right, did he ever make it? Well, that's one of those things we'll never know. Some books you read, they state it as fact. Well, he went there and then came back to Rome. Well, we really don't know that, all right? But his intention was, if he was able, that he was going to go on over to what we call Spain today. So, that's another one of those questions. Paul, did you ever make it to Rome? And I don't know. It may not be important when we get to see Paul. All right, so the church in Rome, we've got a mix of very rich and very poor. We've got a mix of Jews and Gentiles. Mostly they were Gentiles, all right? There were some Jews there. We know this. Romans 2:17, he says, but if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God, and he has like 4 or 5 more ifs. Paul's very famous for having long sentences. And even in English, the sentences are 5 verses long, all right? And this is one of those verses. It just goes on and on, Romans 2:17. And it's an if-then statement, all right? And if you are a Jew and you do this and this and this and this, and then finally he comes to the then, so there were some Jews there, but mostly there were Gentiles there. And in the outline of the book of Romans, he's going to say, you Gentiles are guilty before God. And the Jews are going to be saying, yeah, they're guilty. We know they are. But then what? He says, you Jews are guilty before God. And in chapter 3, all are guilty before God. And he's going to talk about justification. So we've got Jews and Gentiles here in the same congregation. How does that work out in real life? That might be a problem. They had never mixed much before. All right, so the membership racially mixed. Where did the church come from? We don't really know who established the church there in Rome. It could have been people there in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 2. There were, 17 different countries there. There were some from what we would call Italy today that were there in Jerusalem during the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. And they could have taken the gospel home with them. Very likely, though, you've got people in Asia Minor, in what we call Greece today. Paul could have laid his hands on those people. They could have spoken through inspiration, and those people could have gone to Jerusalem. And we really don't know. But somehow the church got started there, and probably several congregations in the city of Rome. There were, 2 to 3 million people in Rome at this time. And so, what we might call house churches today. And this, of course, was written to all of them collectively, and Paul expected them to share this epistle. So we've got the book itself. When we take a look at it, it's really Paul's longest, most doctrinally oriented book. Most of the time when Paul wrote an epistle, he'd say, there's some problems that we need to address there. There's some questions that we need to address there. And when we get to Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, man, they had a list of problems. You're going to go through Corinthians and say, man, that was a problem church. But he still called them brothers. He wasn't ready to mark them off you guys are too far out. I'm not even going to count you as brothers. No, he still said brothers, even though they had this whole laundry list of what we might call big problems, all right? Romans is not like that. Romans is more like, this is doctrine here. This is things I want you to know. How do you think about things? And really the main verse, if you look in, that we'll be looking at, in the first chapter, Romans chapter 1, and I'm sure Michael and Lucian will look at this. Romans chapter 1 and verse 16 and 17 is really the theme of the whole book. I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. And that's really going to be the theme throughout the book. He's going to talk about righteousness. He's going to talk about justification. How do we become righteous? How are we justified? And that's going to be the whole theme throughout the book. All right. So the gospel is really the core of what is the church. If it's not for the gospel, we really don't have any business being here. It's like the basic understanding of Christianity. We're going to end with this quote, and it really fits right here. If you get Romans, God gets you. And I like that quote. All right, I get talking and I get lost from my notes. Paul would have written this letter probably when he was in Corinth. This is evident from the greetings of Gaius, who lived at Corinth. He knew people in Rome. He says, hey, Gaius wants to tell you guys hello. And that's in Romans 16:23 and in 1 Corinthians 1:14. Erastus also had been in Rome, and now he's in Corinth. All right. Also, Phoebe, not Cornette, who we love, but Phoebe, that we don't know her last name, was apparently there in Corinth, and she was either going to take the letter or accompany the letter, depending on who you read, to Rome. So she was going to Rome, and she was going with the letter, and so that's kind of interesting. So she was from Centuria, which is a suburb of Corinth, and so she would be known by Paul. And, Phoebe could attest, yeah, Paul's there, he's doing a good work, and, he'd like to come to Rome as well. Paul wrote this letter about 56 AD. Some authors will fudge a little bit and say 57 to 58. It's while he was in Corinth during the second missionary journey. He is about to he's finished the collection for the needy saints in Jerusalem, and he is about ready to take it back to Jerusalem. And we've got Romans 15:25 and 26 is when he refers to that. And also that's in 1 Corinthians 16. So for 3 months he stayed in Corinth, and he taught there, and he would have had time to write this. All right. Let's skip on down. The purpose, of course, he had planned to go there. He had had trouble with Judaizing teachers in Asia Minor, what we call Turkey. He had had trouble with the Judaizing teachers in what we call Greece. And he says, yeah, it'll get there sooner or later, the same problem. Let's go down to the Reader's Guide to the book of Romans. That's probably too small for you to see. First of all, Paul's going to show the need for universal salvation. Gentiles and Jews are both under condemnation, and all need salvation. Second, he identifies the source of salvation is in Christ's redemptive work. Third, he's going to look at the means of obtaining salvation. How do we get this salvation? And he goes into that. Then fourth, the result of salvation. We're at peace with God. Romans chapter 5, 1 through 25. We have a new life in Christ, Romans 6. We vindicate the righteousness of God. God just doesn't pull laws out of the air. All of the laws of God emanate from who God is. God is righteous, and he wants us to be righteous. When we disobey God and we sin, we're going against the nature of God. And when we get that in our mind, God didn't just pull laws out of the hat because he doesn't want us to be happy. as some people might want to say. God wants us to be like him. And he gives us laws to help us in that way. So then he has the conclusion in Romans chapter 15. If you want a deeper understanding of who we are as Christians, that's in the book of Romans. If you want a deeper study, that's in the book of Romans. Peter is going to say later on, Paul writes some difficult stuff and people will twist it to their own destruction. And probably he's talking about the book of Romans. You can certainly twist it. If you get Martin Luther got focused on Romans, and he was so focused, enamored with Romans, he called the book of James a book of straw. That's worthless. He wasn't even sure if it should be included in the Bible, included in the canon, because it's just worthless. And he misunderstood faith and works. Is it faith and works, or faith, oh yeah, and works? So it's all, he was so focused on one part that the other part was worthless. And, some people like that are like that today. It's not faith or works, it's faith and works. That's something you can think about. Anyway, we will plan next week for you to read the book of Romans, try to do it at one sitting, and Michael will take over where we left